workshop today will, I will probably touch on, because Michelle, I'm allowed to talk a little bit about the contract you've asked me to do, right? Michelle, you're muted and I asked you a question. Okay, she's probably gone. So I will be working with the ONLC again for a little bit. You may have heard that there are some milestones that we're developing specifically for the native stream. So Michelle came to me to ask me if I could be a part of that because, oh my God, there's Joan McDougall. Oh, sorry, I'll get back to talking. And so I've had the pleasure of meeting some people over the years, and I'm looking forward to reconnecting with you again. I mentioned that I moved home to retire in 2014, but I'm now the field coordinator for Saugeen's mental wellness strategy, as well as being the visiting elder at our local high school. So I kept my finger in the pot for education and basic literacy and all of that kind of stuff. When there was a bit of a change in our literacy program here, I worked with Melissa Root a bit to bring her up to speed on what the requirements are of the OALCF. So I'm going to go into the 5 core services, and I'll talk a little bit about the learners that we deal with and the kinds of issues that come up, and then I'll get into report 64. I'll even give you an example of one of the learners I've been working with since I moved home. So we have 5 core services in the OALCF. Number 1, information and referral. Number 2, assessment. 3, learner plan development. 4, training. 5, follow-up, and then they transition into their goal. Hopefully that's the way it works, or that's what the ministry thought, but we all know working with the learners that it's not as easy as that. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Next screen, please, Michelle. Michelle disappeared on us. She said she's keeping, okay. So when a learner or a potential learner comes into the program, this is the very first thing that you're going to encounter with them. Now, it used to be that when people did the intake, that for the first little bit, it was quite informal because it takes the learner a lot of courage to step forward and say, hey, I want to access some of your services. I need some help. So we found that the coordinators, practitioners, I'll use the words interchangeably, would take the time to actually sit with the person and honor the fact that they came forward and asked for some help, and do some very casual, hey, how are you? Even have a coffee with them before they get into something really formal. So this you will find hopefully in the files that you have. I was listening to some of you speak, and you've been in the program for varying lengths of time, but this is important. Your Employment Ontario participant registration. I've just showed the top half of it here, just so you can see what it looks like, but I'll talk about it a bit more further down. And this is an important piece. So next slide, please, and I'll talk a little bit about that, where that participant registration form comes in. So as you're talking to the learner and you're having that casual conversation, or maybe you're transitioning into that participant registration form to gather a bit of information, You might find that they're going to talk a little bit about their experiences. You might not. It depends on how comfortable they feel talking about themselves, how comfortable they feel with you. I'm showing you what's called the ACE framework, Adverse Childhood Experiences. What I like about this is the fact that there have been studies done that show that if you have had these childhood experiences, it's really going to affect your life. And I take it one step further and I tell people some of these may create learning blocks for you. So the fact that they had difficulty in school, or the fact that they're moving along at a pace that's not quite what they had hoped in the literacy program, it's not their fault. They're dealing with learning blocks. And so I'll get into a little bit about how you can incorporate those learning blocks if they decide to tell you about them. So those learner experiences, I won't read them, but I'm going to share a little bit about, as I said, a learner that I've been working with pretty much since I moved home. And he's a young man. I think he's 35 now, so he would have been late 20s when I first started working with him. What I know about his history is he has had several of these experiences, but he's come from a very private family where they have the motto, what happens in our house stays in our house. So it was very hard for him to open up and talk about some of his experiences. However, he did start to trust me, and I found that he's encountered a few of these along the way. All right, next slide, please. Oh, and where this comes in the learner suitability, that's one of the things that you're going to be reporting on, and you're going to be graded on. So it's important to know what kind of a history the learner has, and you could incorporate that into your report 64 under the learner suitability portion. So when you talk with the learner, you're going to get a sense of what the learner's current framework is. As I mentioned, this young man that I've been working with for 7 years now, very shy, painfully shy, almost no eye contact for the first little bit, and then fleeting eye contact, and not speaking very audibly. So you kind of have to repeat the question and lean in. So even just his body language, when I look at each of these are from the medicine wheel, the spirit. And the learning outcome for the spirit is all about vision, how they see themselves. Just the fact that he had trouble talking about himself, spoke in a low voice, made no eye contact, that told me that something was going on and that could possibly be producing a learner block. The learning outcome for the heart, feelings, how they feel about that, or that ties into the blocks about learning. Another portion of the medicine wheel, mind, and learning outcome for that is knowledge. So what I try to look for is what have they learned through those experiences. They might not see it, and maybe it's up to us to point it out to them. I consistently say to the people that I work with, even in the mental wellness strategy that I'm helping to develop here in Saugeen, is you have done so very well. I'm proud of you for hanging in there through what must have been a really scary experience. And they don't see that. They just see themselves as surviving and getting through the day. And there's almost like a change in their body language when you point out to them the strength that they have demonstrated. They might even start to talk about things a little bit more. Another quadrant of the medicine wheel is body, and the learning outcome for that is a skill. So what they've learned through those life experiences, how are they putting them to work? Those are teachings that came to them, and what are they doing with those teachings? Okay, Michelle, next slide, please. Now, I talked a little bit about that young man. I brought this to show you because this is one of the first things he made when I was working with Melissa Root at the library here when she started running the literacy program, and I was asked to help her transition into the role. So one of the things I talked to her about is that each and every learner, you're going to have 5 goal paths that you need to assess with them when you talk to them. So when I was working with this young man, he didn't really have a goal path at that point. He was, as I mentioned, very shy and just getting through the day and not at the point where he was seeing any strengths in himself. So the best fit for him at that point was independence. He may transition, he may not. Right now, he's in one of his downward spirals, but even so, we still continue to hold out hope for them. I see him from time to time, and we always have a chat whenever I run into him, because it's important that he continues to feel support, because there will be so many other people out there who will be judging anybody who goes off track. So we try to counter that by making that eye contact, talking to him, and not making any judgment about what condition he happens to be in. He did, at one of the points in his life, talk to me a little bit about apprenticeship, and that's why I'm showing you this basket. I'll get into that a little bit more. The next slide, please, Michelle. I talked to you a little bit about the strengths that he has demonstrated. And in our conversations, he was starting to talk a little bit about some of his interests. I knew that he was very good with his hands. I knew that he could make rustic furniture. Are you familiar with that term? I see smiles. Some of you are familiar with that term. So I have a table actually sitting in my office, just in that room behind me, that he made for me. And then we look at the needs. So this is what we call the SIN approach. I got this from Frontier College when I first started at Native Women's Resource Center in 1987, 34 years ago. This is what Frontier College taught me was their approach. SIN. What strengths have they demonstrated? What are their interests? And those can be motivators. What are their needs? Okay, next slide, please, Michelle. Because we want to get them to stay in the program. So I was telling you a little bit about this guy's current framework. When I first started working with him, I got him interested in going to the literacy program because one of the first things he shared with me was that he was not very successful in school. But he also felt that he was smart enough to realize that he didn't think it was his fault. He thought it was because of the way he was being treated. I'll just leave it at that because that happens sometimes and we don't know what the reasons are for the instructor or the teacher or whatever you call that person they're interacting with. So by the time they come to us and we've put them into the Oalcf, their journey might not be straight to their goal, might take a few little twists and turns, and that's exactly what's going on here. The reason I chose that is because we hear in our culture that when people circle around, they make a joke about it and they say, you know what, if it's good enough for the Eagles, it's good enough for me. So I thought, well, yes, it's not a bad thing to be circling around. as long as they keep coming back to their goal, and as long as they keep trying to make changes in their lives. So next slide, please, Michelle. When I thought about that, and I was first doing some of the work with the ONLC around, jeepers, I can't even remember what it was at the time. Michelle, do you remember when you came to see me in Toronto? You were looking for me because you saw my name coming up in some of the readings that you were doing when you started to work at the ONLC, and you thought you wanted to talk to me. And I happened to call you and say, hey, welcome. Do you remember
It's
what
got to
you...
be about 10 years ago now.
Yeah,
I've been
and do
here
you
10
remember what
years.
you came to ask me to do? I think it was to do with the OALCF. And man, it took a lot of reading to get up to speed on this stuff. So I really feel for the practitioners out there, because I was doing a lot of reading and that was my job. Your job is to work with the learners and do all this reading and do the admin and whatever else they throw in there. Oh, I got to plug in my computer, otherwise I'm going to... I thought I plugged it in when I brought it out. Sorry about that. Okay, otherwise I would have died on you. So as I was contemplating some of the things we encounter with learners when we're working with them, and I wanted the ministry to be on side that this is a fact of life. I found this quote on page 22 of MTCU, that's what it was at the time, Ministry of Training Colleges and Universities Practitioner Guide to Task-Based Programming. And they said for learners working at lower literacy levels, considerable time will be devoted to building an adequate foundation of skills. So I took that and thought, yay. Next slide, please. So this is the framework that I've been working with ever since forever. I remember when Sylvia Miracle first started talking about this when I was working in the ministry. And this is what she said, that we are spirit, heart, mind, and body. We are, not we have, we are. And that the educational system, for the most part, did not recognize all four of those quadrants. It might have recognized mind because they were trying to teach us knowledge. And it might have recognized body because what do we do with that knowledge? Back in the day when I was in school, we had things like home economics and manual training and phys ed. So educational programming at that point recognized and acknowledged two of those four quadrants, 50% of who we are. There was no recognition of spirit. There was no recognition of heart. So what she said about that is that's where our imbalance comes from. And I thought, yeah, that's true. That's not our fault that schooling didn't focus on those things that are important to who we are. So when I started working on the OALCF programming that Michelle asked me to do, I likened each quadrant to a section of the OALCF. Spirit, goal path, the vision that they have of themselves, where they're going. The heart, what do they feel about what they need to acquire or what they have now to get onto that goal path. Mind, what kind of skills can we teach them? Body, what kinds of tasks will they have to do to get to that goal path? And okay, next, I'm just looking at the time because I have to leave a bit of time for report 64. So when you look at spirit or vision, consider the learner's goal path. They may have several, but for the purposes of your participant registration form and the learner plan and the training, there is one that's going to be dominant. They may switch when they get into your programming and realize, hey, I'm capable of more. So what you should do at this point is consult. There is a document out there called the 5 Goal Paths, and also look at learner assessment to see what the learner already has and determine what else the learner needs. Next slide, please. South, design an engaging learning plan. So you look at what competencies and skills and knowledge, skills, and attitudes are they going to have to acquire to get onto that goal path. That young man I was telling you about, very shy. At that point, his only goal path that we were finally able to agree upon was independence, because he knew how to do things. He knew how to make, what did I call that a while ago? Rustic furniture. So I said, what other kinds of things have you made? And he has a very rare, it's kind of like a dying art here. He knows how to work with flint and how to make flint stones for starting fires and things like that. As a matter of fact, he was teaching one of the guys here, one of the elders who came in to work with him when he was in the hospital. We all went in to see him. It wasn't COVID then, so we could go in as a group, and that elder continued to work with him until he got back on his feet again and deciding that he was putting that kind of life aside. So then, as a gift back to the elder who gave him teachings and worked with him, he showed him how to work with flint and how to start fires using flint, not matches, and all of that kind of stuff. So he was able to give back. And I said, okay, you know what? I'm working with Melissa right down here, and she's got some fun ideas for the kind of programming she wants to incorporate and get people involved. They're going to be making black ash baskets. Would you like to learn how to do that? And he said, yeah, I'd go. So he influenced his dad and his partner to come with him at the time. So you can imagine how Melissa felt. 3 people walk in the door and say, I want to be part of this programming. Learner felt good. Melissa felt good. I thought, okay, he's learning a new skill and he might even consider a different goal path. Next slide, please. I haven't gotten this far with him because, like I said, he's on a little bit of a slippery slope right now, but certainly hope that he's going to pick himself back up and get moving forward again. Okay, so what you need to do for the West, working on the knowledge, you observe their performance on the assessment and the task-based activities, and you can figure out from that what knowledge and skills, attitudes, and behavior they demonstrate, and ensure that the learning plan confirms that and builds on them. Okay, next one, please. When he gets to the point where I feel that he might be able to do a milestone, I want to make sure that he's going to have success. So I won't take him right into the milestone. I will have him do a task-based activity. And I'll talk a little bit about that. There is on the ONLC website, I forget what it's called now, but if you go to the ONLC website, there is a drop-down menu in 5 or 6 different dimensions. I think it's under resources, and you can find some task-based activities. So I did some of those and I developed the task-based activities, and walked people through a webinar for how to develop your own, and then people started developing them and sending them into the ONLC. So what you'll see on that drop-down menu is the task-based activities. So try them with a task-based activity first. And when they do well, experience success, then you ask them, suggest to them that they might be able to do a milestone. Okay, next slide, please. So when the learner comes into your program, one of the first things I found out is that back in the day when I worked at Native Women's Resource Center, we had to have a different filing system. Now what the ministry is looking for is that for each learner, you have a 6-part learner folder. And there are important documents that you need to put into that folder. I'm just turning my page here. Participant registration, I showed you that one already. Got to make sure that's in there. But you also have to put any assessments that you have in there, task-based activities, those kinds of things. That's what your ET is going to look for when they come in. A learning plan. I will show you a little bit about a learning plan in another slide. And on your learning plan, it's important to document any referrals in, or I'm sorry, participant registration form. It's important to document any referrals in when that person came to you, word of mouth, or were they referred by someone else. I'll talk a little bit more about the referrals when we get down into the actual report 64, because there are some very important points you need to be aware of under each one. I remember when I was working with the practitioner here before Melissa came in, one of the things she told me was that if she notices when they're working on a task-based activity to determine whether they're ready for a milestone, and she sees an area that a piece of a teaching or a piece of work that they could do a little bit better, then she will give them what is called a compliment sandwich. Compliment them first on even trying, and then put in your little pointer for what maybe could have been done a little better, and then follow that up with a compliment so they don't feel like, oh, I screwed up. Because they can come in feeling like that may be their view of themselves. Okay, the next slide, please. So the learner plan template. This is very, very important, although I see that Jake isn't online yet. I talked to him about the learner plan template because when I first went over to see Jake, when he started at Nopequa, we actually walked through a learner plan template, and I realized that I don't have the link for this. So Michelle, what I'm going to do is send you some links afterwards to send out to the people who are participating. You can actually do this on your computer with the learner as you're suggesting different activities. What Jake did say to me though, is that since COVID, they don't so much use this one because often they're doing offsite, the learners are doing offsite work and they're connecting virtually. So it's not like you could sit down with them and go through the learner plan template, but we hold out our hope that COVID is going to come to an end soon and you can have them come back into your program and you can interact with them. So I'll send you the link for that. Next one, please, Michelle. So back to this young man, I did walk him through that learner plan template. And then the next piece is assessment. Here's another thing that Michelle asked me to do. There is a tool out there called Escargot, and I can't even remember, essential skills, knowledge, and attitudes for, anyway, very linear. Michelle sent it to me and said, hey, what do you think of this? And that was my comment, very linear, somewhat tedious, really not very interesting. And I apologize if some of you are enamored. of escargot. But I'm all for let's make things applicable to the learners. Let's make learning fun. Let's engage them. So Michelle said then, would you be interested in helping to develop indigenized assessment? So there's a few tools in this one. I started off with an easy one that would look at the different areas of the Oalcf, the competencies. It's Josephine Mondaman was doing her water walk at the time. She did a short little 5 or 6 minute video and talked about what was important to her about doing the water walk, what she learned, what she wants people to understand. So we started with that because I figured no matter where your learner is, they can sit down, they can watch a video, they can learn something from it. And this assessment talks about you can either hand the questions to the learner before they do the video so they know what they're looking for, or you can sit and read the questions with the learner because maybe they're not at the stage yet where they can read well enough to understand what it is they're looking for. Then you give the learner the option of answering verbally or answering in writing. This young man chose to answer in writing, but they weren't full sentences. Now I was okay with that at that point because he was trying. He attempted to write. Now there is not a rating as to where they are on each of the competencies for some of these tools because I thought it would be too hard. It depends on how they answer, where you're going to put them. Now, I thought that I had put the OALCF a little sooner in the slide than this, but I guess I didn't. Next slide, maybe it's there. There it is. So this is the important thing that you should have. And as a matter of fact, I believe there is a color coded one of these that's laminated. And I believe each program has a copy and it's up on your wall somewhere in your office. For some of you who are brand new, look for it. I also suggest that you have this on your desk if you have like a sheet of glass on the top and you slide it underneath and constantly refer to it. When I was talking to, I went down to do an orientation for a practitioner at Native Women's Resource Center. And as I went through the assessment process, the participant intake, assessment, and then asked her to walk through this with me and try to figure out where the learner would be. She said, you know what? I'm going to photocopy that. I'm going to keep lots of copies of this. And what I will do, each and every assessment I do with them, I will put the date across the top and I will highlight what they are able to demonstrate in that assessment, what competency they're at on the left-hand side of the page. And then you move in to the next column, task group, and you can figure out which task group I'm going to ask you. For this basket that this young man made, they came in and somebody taught them how to go out in the bush and look for black ash, but there were two kinds of trees that are quite similar. You have to make sure you have the right one. So she showed them how to differentiate what is the black ash and what is the other, I forget what the term was she used for it. You got to make sure you have the right one. So they're listening to that. And then she showed them how to strip the black ash, and you have to let it sit for a little while and dry enough and pound it and then do the strips. They walked them through the steps. So that's just a quick and dirty. Look at the left-hand column. What did he use? What did he demonstrate? Find and use information, communicate ideas and information, understand and use numbers, use digital technology, manage learning, or engage with others. In the interest of time, I'm not going to have you answer because I should be getting to report number 64 soon. Back to what the woman at Native Women's Resource Center said to me, she would then highlight which of the competencies the learner demonstrated in doing this, and then move to the next column, which of the task groups were involved in doing this. Then move level 1, level 2, level 3. And that will give you a good idea of how the learner has come in with some skills and developed some skills. So what I say to people is take your most fun activity that you have ever done and walk through each one of these columns, starting from the left and working your way in. Now I'm going to ask you, share an activity that you have done where the learners had a lot of fun. One person, please, and only one because of the time.
I can talk about one. So one of the activities that we've had is often we'll have guests come in to do workshops and activities aside from what we deliver on a daily basis. So we had Isaac Muda come in, and he did some printing, some screen printing with the group, and they're printing on canvas, and they're also printing on wood pallets. And that was, I actually filmed a little bit of it. I think I was using a tablet at the time to film it. And people were involved with the community to do that work. And it was wonderful. It was very physical, because if you've done any screen printing, you realize it's a process. There's a lot of cleanup. It's really physical.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Joan. I was just looking at the chart and working my way in from left to right as you talked about what they were doing and what competencies and task groups and level indicators would have been involved in that activity. Thank you. So next one, please, Michelle. And then I think we're going to get into task report 64. Now, this is, we used to have an Oalcf learning press. I won't get into what happened. When I was doing the task-based activities, I had to look at what's a quick and dirty way, other than what that learner said, about photocopying many, many pages of the Oalcf chart and then highlighting. So Maria Morrison, who used to work at the Oalcf Learning Press, very creative mind, she developed this, and I will actually send Michelle this diagram. It's in that task-based activity that I told you that I developed, but also you may want to have this as a simple page. So this is probably far more interesting, although you'll see at the levels down here across the bottom in the chart, it describes the levels, the level indicators. On this chart here, on this graphic, it doesn't, but you're going to have it on your wall. It should be on your wall somewhere in your office and possibly even on your desk. You can do the constant referring back and forth to what are they doing here. Okay, so the next slide, please. Going to skip that one. Next one. One more little story about the learner that I'm working with. So that's the activity I did with him first of all. the video on Josephine Mondamin so that it would be an assessment for him to get into the program, and we do the participant registration form. And then the last activity I did with him in another context was something called Photo Voice. We were able to get some cameras, but people can also use their phones depending on what kinds of apps. Anyway, a lot of people have phones, a lot of people have cameras. And I asked him some questions about his life. Where did he see himself right now? And where would he like to go? Take a picture that reminds you of what you want to do with your life. So this is the picture that he took. He has it on his wall. He told me about it. And then he wrote something about it. Next slide, please, Michelle. Oh, next slide. Sorry, it's not on a slide. It's, okay, so back up 2 slides, please, back to that eagle picture. What he wrote about it. In Anishinaabe culture, the eagle has spiritual significance. So just in that statement alone, he knows a bit of his cultural teachings. The eagle is thought to be able to fly closest to Creator, so is considered to be Creator's messenger. An eagle feather is a very sacred item. I chose a picture of an eagle to represent what is most important in remembering to make a better life. I found it in a magazine. The caption underneath says, "Pursue your passion." I wrote life under passion as though to say, pursue your passion, pursue your life. An eagle soars through the air, looking for what it can get to survive. It is a very strong, wise creature that I want to be like. I want to be a person sort of like that eagle, but it feels like I'm less than I should be right now. So there's all kinds of competencies and task group levels that he's demonstrated in that, and it shows the progress in the 7 years from when he hardly said anything, hardly made any eye contact, and now he can open up a little bit about his life. Okay, next slide, please, Michelle. And we're not going to do that one because we're now getting on to when we should be getting to report 64. So this is your most important report. It's your detailed service quality. It's the only performance measure report, and it's the report you're going to use both for your interim and your final report. You will use this report to complete your monitoring questionnaires. So you will be getting visits from your ETC fairly regularly, and this is one of the things they're going to look for. What I have seen them do here in the 7 years I've been home, but also in the many years that I didn't live here, but came up to visit with the literacy coordinator. They will even come in, sit and talk with you for a little bit and say, okay, I want to see a learner file. And they pick. Sometimes people have thought, oh, well, I'll show them a good one. I'll show them one of my exemplars. Some of them will just go over and they'll pick one out at random and they'll make sure, do you have that 6-part file? Do you have those important pieces? The participant registration form, the assessment. There's even an exit form where you're going to be asking them if on a scale of 1 to 5, how would you rate this program to another person who asked you? So I'm going to look at the notes that I made, that it's very important for people to remember when you're filling out your report 64. So next slide, please. This is very important. This is how you're going to be measured for your program. And I believe funding is tied to it as well. So there are different columns here. In the left-hand column, the dimension that they're going to be looking at. Customer service, that's 40% of the weighting of how they're going to rate your program. Customer satisfaction is 15% of it. Service coordination is 25% of it. And as I mentioned, for customer service, that's a measure of satisfaction for learners who are exiting from your program. And you ask them that question, how likely they are to recommend your program to someone who's looking for similar services. Now, what I've heard from people is, but sometimes they just disappear and I haven't had time to do the exit. I'm looking at the time. So I'm just going to tell you some stuff and then maybe we can get into a bit of a discussion about it. What the way that people sometimes get around that is they decide they're going to ask that question regularly throughout the programming, because sometimes you might be able to sort of get an inkling, gee, this person seems to be struggling, this person seems to be, their interest isn't quite what it was, they might be on their way out the door. So I would ask this question, what coordinators have told me is they will ask this question at regular intervals. And that way you've got it documented, you've got it in the file, because what really counts with the ministry is having that document, having it actually recorded in the file, so that if they disappear for whatever reasons, as I said, this young man, he's kind of off track right now. So you have a timeline that you're looking at. I believe it's 60 days. If there is no activity in the file, nothing from the learner, then they suggest that you close that file. So if you've done that regular questioning of how likely, then it's in the file. But also you could use this as an opportunity to now what the ministry looks for is that if you're if the learner is rating it at a 4 or a 5 on a scale of 1 to 5. So if it's not a 4 to 5, you might ask what could be done better, and that will give you suggestions for how to improve your program. Changing the hours, having more hands-on activities such as the one Joan suggested. So the third column here where it says weight, that's how that's how much weight the ministry gives to each of those dimensions. In the fourth column here, standard. That's that's the standard that you have to meet in order to earn the percentage that's in the weight column. So say, for example, I'm just pulling these figures out of the air. I'm not talking about our program here in Saugeen because of COVID. I haven't been there since probably summer. So I don't know how many learners she's got in the program. I don't know what they're saying about the program. So let's say, for example, I should tell you that when what you got to look for is there's a very important standard. You're going to have to look at your service delivery agreement, and I believe it's Schedule E or F, and that tells you what you've committed to. Example, you could say, all right, I'm going to recruit and bring in 30 learners this fiscal year. You're based on the fiscal year. So looking at that standard, 90% of 30 is 27. So in order to earn that 15% weighting, you should have recruited 27 learners. measure that you're going to have to meet is called service coordination. There's a little bit of controversy about this one. The weight that the ministry gives it is 25%. And what they look at is, and you have to meet 50% of that. So service coordination they consider as a measure of how the service provider supports access to and from other programs in the community, be they education, training, or community services. I'm on the Saugeen First Nation, and to my left and in front of me and to the right are different kinds of programs. There's the Ontario Works, there's the library, there's Anishinaabeg Child and Youth Prevention Services. So when you do your participant registration form, it's important to capture where that learner came from. Were they referred to you by another agency? And here's where the contradiction comes in. Over the years, people have reported consistently that word of mouth is their best way of bringing the learners in. And indeed, the ministry asks you to ask the learner, how would you rate this program? And if they've said 4 or 5, they're likely to say to their friend who wants to upgrade or learn how to get into one of the trades, they might say, hey, I had a really good experience with the literacy program. Why don't you go there? For whatever reason, the word of mouth doesn't count. So this is where it gets a little bit contradictory. What also doesn't count is if they're switching from another LBS program to your program. And the reason it doesn't count is because they're already in the LBS system. So you have to be creative about how you capture where they've been referred from or where you're referring them to. One of the things that I used to tell people when I was doing some of the orientation to programming is to look at who your support services are in the area that could conceivably offer something to the learners in your program. And it's kind of like what Joan said earlier about having a guest speaker in. So you can invite that person as a guest speaker. And it could be that while they're talking, a learner could be sitting there saying, oh, I didn't know they offered that. I think I could take advantage of that. I want to find a little bit more about that. So that's meeting some of your service coordination goals. The next one is effectiveness. That, if you look in the left-hand column, that's going to be 50% of how the ministry is going to rate you on that. So 20% of that 50 is looking at suitability, the learner profile, and 30% is looking at learner progress. So for the suitability learner profile on your participant registration form that I showed you a while back, but only part of it, there is a section that looks at where what experiences does that learner have, or what's their background? And those indicators are less than grade 12. The next section, while it has 4 questions, it's all rated as 1, and it's their source of income. Did they come from Ontario Works, ODSP? That's the disability, no income, or a Crown Ward. So they only count as 1, those 4 altogether. So what you do is you try to make sure that a learner comes in with roughly 3 of those indicators, because by the time you put Ontario Works, ODSP, no income, and Crown Ward all together, that actually drops down to 10 indicators. And you'll see that, trying trying to figure out where they came up with that 3. Anyway, try to make sure somewhere when you're doing the participant registration form that you're able to put a check mark beside at least one of those indicators. And as you're talking to the learner, you might find out that there's other indicators that they didn't tell you in the first meeting, because in the case of the young man I've been working with, he'd been taught, you don't talk about yourself. But as he came to trust me, then he would open up and tell me more. So you might actually find out. I didn't find out until probably in the last year that he had actually been diagnosed as having a cognitive disability. He did not say that. So we didn't have him in we didn't check the indicator that talks about disability. So we sure went back in and changed that. But anytime you make a change to that participant registration form, please make sure that you put a date and that you probably even put your initials, but you've also got to follow that up with putting it in CAMS, because that's where they're going to be, that's primarily what the ministry looks at until they come out and look at your learner files. And like I said, they're very, very prone to just saying, I'll reach in, and they pull out the file. That it's a random thing. So what people have said is that it's probably important to keep that suitability checklist in each file, because you may have to go back and revisit it anytime the learner gives you an inkling of, oh gee, I didn't check that off when I did the intake with that person, because that didn't come up, but it's coming up now. So rather than rifling through your file and trying to find it, have one in each and every file right at the very front, so that you're not putting a lot of time. I know how busy you are, and you don't have the time to be rifling through files. So why do they ask that? The rationale of the ministry is that they want to look at what barriers do the learners come in with, and how are we addressing those barriers, and more importantly, are we serving the people that we are saying that we're going to serve? Okay, learner progress, the way they look at that is, and I'm going to ask some of you more experienced practitioners, because it's been a while since I've been in the program, asking people specific questions. Well, what they look at is that in each fiscal year, a learner completes at least one milestone, or at least has a milestone in progress. Now, what does that mean? That the milestone is in progress? They can try the milestone, I believe, up to 3 times, as long as there's a little bit of time in between. If for whatever reason they weren't able to complete the milestone, then you can wait, I forget the exact number of days, and you can have them try the milestone again. So if they're in between attempts, then that shows that there is a milestone in progress. Now, what I've been told is that there are certain milestones that are applied to all levels, and all of the goal paths, because when you think back to those 5 goal paths I showed you in the beginning, apprenticeship, education, that kind of thing, you need to try to make sure that the milestone that you're administering to them is on that goal path. But there are several milestones that meet all 5 of those goal paths. So you can be a little bit strategic about which milestone you're picking out. And I see that what I forgot to do was include my notes from which milestones work really well for meeting all 5 goal paths and meet a number of levels. So I'm going to go back into my computer and I'm going to look at my notes. Some of you more experienced practitioners, Walter, what are some of the milestones that are applicable to all goal paths, are fairly simple for the learner?
I find, was it B4, creative expression, covers creative expression, like a creative project, but it also encompasses learning with others and perhaps some reading or perhaps some math as well. So it's very flexible.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so which milestone would that be?
Oh, I just call it, it's B4. It's not leveled,
Mm-hmm.
but it covers levels 1, 2, and 3, I suppose. And it's called creative expression, or express yourself creatively. So perhaps a journal, a poem, a song, a piece of artwork, and they get that milestone. And if it's done as part of a group project, they get the learning with others. And if there's some math or reading involved, they get perhaps work towards one of those milestones as well. It's very flexible depending on the creative project you're working on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And I realized why I couldn't find it in my notes. Next slide, please, Michelle.
Maybe Joan has, Joan, would you have one that you know off the top of your
Okay.
head?
Oh, good morning. Thank you, Michelle. I'll say something that will seem unrelated, and sorry about not being able to answer your question directly. So I do more administration as opposed to doing the practitioner side. So I do the writing, reporting, business planning, all of that. But I will say this, because I do have to look at report 64 and look at that as a way to do continuous improvement and do program development, so that all of the staff that are working in the program are working towards not only meeting the targets that we set for ourselves in the business plan, but also so that they understand why we need to be attending to the details. And I just wanted to mention this. I don't mean to go on, but if you do not close files, you cannot generate any of the numbers that we're seeing on the DSQ. So in other words, you're having a continuous intake of learners coming into the program, but at the same time, within every 6 months, you have to also be closing files, because those are the numbers for those learner plans that get closed. Those numbers that are in there, those are what get counted into the SQ. And sorry about not being able to answer the milestone question. Generally, if I need information on that, I have to refer to the index.
Okay, thank you,
Thanks,
Joan.
Joan.
Thank you for bringing up that important point, that some of these weightings that the ministry will give you are based on closed files. And I see Walter's got a hand up. Go ahead, Walter.
Yep. Hi there again. Following up on Joan, that's a very good point. I can give the example of customer satisfaction. That statistic isn't generated until you close a file. And I learned that one quarter when I didn't close any files and I had a score of 0. So what I've learned from that is to play the game. And when I'm closing files for that statistic, if I'm just going to be closing 1 or 2 for that quarter, I'm going to make sure it's a file that has ranked high on customer satisfaction, so I don't damage my stat for that dimension. And if, for example, I have a file where I've been scored very low on customer satisfaction, I'm going to save it for the next quarter and bury it with several that have scored me high to cancel that out. So that's just one way I work within the system to deal with those stats.
Yeah, thank you, Walter, for mentioning that. And I do like your choice of the word strategic, because we do have a formula that we're working within, and sometimes parts of that formula don't exactly apply to our context. So that's what Walter does.
Melissa Shango has a question as well.
I do. I just wanted to follow up for the milestones. So I usually use milestone 60, which is the engage with others. And that one meets all of the 5 goal paths, as well as the milestone 58 is the managed learning, and that meets all of the goal paths as well.
Thank you. I'm going to add this to my list, because what I found out when I did my phone around before putting together this presentation, there are 3 other milestones that people found are applicable to all of the goal paths and have a variety, or they have no levels or a variety of levels. So if you show the next slide, please. Unless, I'm sorry, did I miss anybody? Anybody have their hand up and want to say something? Okay, so next slide, please, Michelle. And so the milestones that people told me that work well for them are milestone 14. And that's the one when I watch and or listen to a film, broadcast, or presentation to extract information. So that would be the milestone that I used with that young man when I showed him the video of Josephine Mondaman. We went over the questions first so he'd know what to look for, and then he could answer me verbally, or he could answer me. And as I said, he chose not to put it in sentences for now. So that told me how he feels about sentence writing and maybe what we could work on. And it applies to all of the goal paths. EASPI, first letter of each of the goal paths. Milestone number 36, use a medium of your choice to express yourself creatively. And that's what Walter said. And then there's milestone number 54, log into a user account on a computer. And that's level D1. And I'm sorry for my typo there where it says EAS and then those 2 characters, I meant EASPI, meaning that it applies to all of the goal paths. Now, in putting in a milestone, completed or in progress milestone, it has to be done in each fiscal year. So another strategic thing, thank you, Walter, for that word, I found from some practitioners is that they will designate April in their heads as got to get them to do a milestone, because we don't know when they're going to exit. Sometimes they just disappear on us. And if I have to close that file, there's a milestone in there. Now, depending on who your ET is, you might be able to, and again, strategically, use these milestones 2 or 3 times, because it could be different levels of example. Watch or listen to a film. What if I showed this young man a more, actually I found out as we were watching that video together that he's very interested in health issues because his dad has a lot of health issues. So Michelle, remember when you asked me to pilot some of the STEAM lessons? I said to him, I got some videos I could show you. Are you interested? He was actually interested. So here's this young man who's writing 1-word answers to some of the questions, and he's literally glued to the computer as he's watching these complicated health videos, health issue videos from STEAM curriculum. Now, back to strategically using a milestone a couple of times. You will get an ET who will look at milestone diversity. So be careful of how many times you use them. Okay, so Next question, next slide, please. And before we talk about that, are there any questions in the chat box? Does anybody have something they'd like to add to that, the discussion we've had so far?
There are no questions so far. Oh, somebody just said, I'm just wondering if this recording, yes. It'll be available on our YouTube channel.
Okay, good, thank you. So the next slide. And for whatever reason, my presentation has disappeared. I can see some of you down the right-hand side of my screen, but the actual PowerPoint itself has disappeared. But I know that slide because this was one of the slides that came up when I was doing the research for the Oalcf and then the task-based activities. We were very cognizant of the fact that we tend to work with the medicine wheel and different aspects of it, which is a circle. But we were also cognizant of the fact that we were going to have to answer to the different dimensions and indicators on the Oalcf chart. We're going to have to meet those. And how do you meet that when we're working with the medicine wheel? And then this image popped into my head while I was sitting there at a conference. For some reason or other, Christy Brissette, who was working at the Council of Ministers of Education, got up to go and do something. And as I looked at her, I could almost see this image where there was a square inside a circle. That stuck with me, and I thought, that's the Oalcf chart. We put it inside of our medicine wheel, and we are meeting every indicator, competency, task group in that chart, but there are also overlaps, areas of the circle that Oalcf doesn't meet. The Oalcf chart doesn't address or meet, but we do when we take the holistic approach, and those are our cultural competencies, however you want to define them. And the next chart, the next slide, please. Familiar guy.
Oh, no,
And,
what happened?
pardon?
My
I don't
screen
know.
disappeared.
Okay, mine did too, and all I can do is see
There we go. Oops.
okay, so you've got that last, there it is.
Sorry, everybody.
I loved what this guy had said. I get a little bit political sometimes about these frameworks that we have to meet. And what I was telling people, I actually got this from Sally Gizionga, who used to work at, I think she started out at Native Women's Resource Center. One of the important things that she told to her learners was that we have a way of approaching learning that is very holistic and encompasses our worldview. But when you have to meet the learning framework of another culture, particularly the mainstream culture, there's a formula. And I'm going to teach you that formula. And here it is. So what that reminded me of is what Albert Einstein said when, here's his quote, "Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts." So that's my political spiel to let's make the learning holistic. Let's make it fun. Let's make it applicable to the learners. Don't teach to the framework, teach to the learner, and you will cover that framework. So I see anything. Okay, no questions in the chat box. Questions from anybody? Comments? Oh, I started to ask the question earlier, Michelle, about that contract you asked me to consider. She's gone again.
No, I'm here.
You're there?
I'm just
Okay.
trying to multitask here. I'm looking at the chat box. I'm trying to make sure that my slides don't go off and see and watch people's pictures too, so in case they're raising their hands.
Yes, I understand that. So with this contract that Michelle has asked me to do, it's going to be focusing on milestones. And any questions that you have out of today's presentation or things that weren't covered in today's presentation, you're kind of grappling with, in my view, that's going to feed into any of the work that I would be doing on milestones. So I have absolutely no qualms about you sending me an email and saying, hey, what do I do about this? And if I don't know, I can find out.
Oh, geez, what's going on? Is there any questions? And thank you, Ningwapwe. We do have, stop sharing my screen right now, as I want to show you all some of the resources. We have this resource. Oh, it's not showing up.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
That Ngwakwe did for us. And it's on the Turtles Back Publishing. And then this one, and she showed you the cover for the assessment. But you do have them, or you all should have them, and if you don't, please get in touch with us and we'll send them to you. All of, like, they should be in your resources because everybody gets the free resources from ONLC. Once we develop them, we send them out. So if they're missing from your resources, then you can ask for them again. The Ngwakwe also did webinars that are on our website on developing task-based activities, and she also went through the OALCF as well. And we'll be also developing more in the lines of to assist the new practitioners with a new practitioner certificate, I guess, but that's under development right now. So, so if we have no other questions for Ngwakwe, you can get in touch with us and we can pass on her email if that's okay with Ngwakwe. If they have any questions.
Absolutely.
We do have a draw for everybody, everybody who participated. And here's the little draw that they put together. So I'm going to choose one. And it's a gift certificate from the keg. So you can go in, and the winner is Walter Preddy.
And what did Walter win?
He wins a keg gift certificate.
Thank you so much.
So you can go and have a nice steak and lobster or something. And we'll be having another one tomorrow, and tomorrow it's the same time. And we have Robin will be going through the CAMs, which is everybody's favorite, right? And again, she'll be going through report 64, but her expertise is in like where you look at, how you look at the numbers and so on for it, and like picking it apart. Picking it apart, I think. But she'll also be going through your CAMS assessment, your CAMS input, and how to put in new clients into your CAMS. And I guess it was pretty tricky for her to put it on slides, because really we usually have people actively do that when we go in to visit the programs themselves. So hopefully it'll help anyway, especially with all the new practitioners. Okay, so if there's no other questions, we do have an evaluation that's on the that we put the link on. If you could go to the link in the chat box and do the evaluation for this workshop. Oh, there's one new message from Walter. Thanks. You're welcome, Walter. Okay, we'll see everybody tomorrow. I wish I could see you all in person. Maybe this year sometime we'll get together and at the end of the year or something, so I can give hugs. I really miss giving hugs. You take care, everybody.
And I hope you make a Toronto way, Joan.
You have to come further than that in Oalcf. I'm in British Columbia.
Oh, you're in British Columbia. Oh my God.
Yes.
I'll
Yeah.
come there too. My daughter lives there.
Okay, I'm in the Okanagan.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah,
in the Okanagan a year ago, February. A year ago, November.
Oh, did you get down to the Inalkin Center?
No, I was at a tourism,
Everybody.
Indigenous tourism conference and bought a lot of copper from copper artisans.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that we lost Lee Miracle on, I believe it was Thursday morning. And at our staff meeting, because I do my job virtually for Toronto still. And in our staff meeting, we had